While the world's cameras are pointed at the burning oil infrastructure of the Persian Gulf, a far more dangerous countdown has started 9,000 kilometers away. On the morning of March 5, 2026, satellite imagery confirmed what Pacific Command analysts had been watching develop for 72 hours. North Korean heavy artillery units repositioning along the demilitarized zone. ICBM transporter erector launchers moving from hardened storage toward pre-surveyed launch positions in North Pyongan province. Elevated signals activity across the Korean People's Army's Strategic Rocket Forces command network. This is not a drill. This is not a provocation designed to extract diplomatic concessions. This is Pyongyang executing a strategic calculation that is not the product of irrationality or desperation. It is the product of arithmetic. North Korea has read the munitions expenditure reports from Operation Epic Fury. It has assessed the production capacity of the American defense industrial base, and it has reached a conclusion that is precise, cold, and correct. The United States is running out of the specific weapons that deter it. To track the invisible shifts in military inventory before they detonate in financial markets, and to understand why a war in the desert is simultaneously rewriting the strategic map of Asia, make sure you are subscribed to this intelligence network. The analysis that follows is not a prediction. It is an inventory count. And the number at the bottom of that count is the most important strategic number in the world right now. Chapter 1 begins with a number that Raytheon does not advertise, but that every defense ministry on the planet has calculated: 550. That is the approximate annual production capacity of the Patriot PAC-3 interceptor missile at current factory output, not 550 per month, per year. The Patriot PAC-3 is the terminal defense weapon on which the security of South Korea and Japan depends more than any other single system in the American arsenal. South Korea hosts 7 Patriot batteries defending its major population centers and U.S. military installations. Japan hosts 12. These are the systems that would intercept North Korean ballistic missiles in their terminal phase if Pyongyang initiated a strike. Their effectiveness is directly proportional to one variable: how many interceptors are in the magazine. Now consider what has been happening to that magazine since February 28. The Iranian retaliatory campaign has been prosecuted with Shahed loitering munitions at $35,000 per unit, and ballistic missiles at $500,000 to $1,000 per unit. The defending coalition has been responding with Patriot PAC-3 interceptors at $4,000 per shot, Arrow 3 interceptors at $2,000 to $3,500 per shot. SM-3 Block IIA interceptors produced at approximately 30 units per year in combined U.S.-Japan production, at between $10,000 and $27,000 per engagement. 30 SM-3s per year. 30. A single night of heavy Iranian ballistic missile salvos can demand SM-3 intercepts in the double digits. The production line replaces them at a rate of less than 3 per month. This is not a logistical inconvenience. It is a structural depletion dynamic whose endpoint is a Pacific theater with degraded ballistic missile defense capability at the precise moment when the Korean Peninsula is mobilizing. The Tomahawk cruise missile, 500 produced per year, the primary precision strike weapon available to 7th Fleet for Korean Peninsula contingency operations, is being expended from Red Sea and Mediterranean launch positions against Iranian targets. What leaves a submarine's vertical launch cell in the Persian Gulf does not reappear in a submarine's vertical launch cell in the Sea of Japan. The laws of physics contain no exceptions for simultaneous strategic requirements. But here is the detail that most analysis of the munitions depletion problem misses entirely, and it matters more than the unit counts. The real danger isn't what the United States is firing today. It's what the production timeline means for what won't be available in 60, 90, and 120 days. Because the window that North Korea is currently in doesn't close when the Persian Gulf conflict ends. It widens as the depletion compounds. Hold that thought. Because Chapter 2 requires understanding what Kim Jong-un is actually looking at. And it isn't a military map. Chapter 2 opens not in Pyongyang, but in Seoul, specifically in the trading rooms where South Korean institutional investors began executing capital flight orders in the early Asian session on March 5th. The Kospi index declined. The South Korean won weakened against the dollar. Foreign institutional investors reduced South Korean equity exposure in coordinated selling that reflected not panic, but calculation. The calculation is this: the investment thesis for South Korean equities, for any asset whose value depends on Korean Peninsula stability, rests on a single foundational assumption: that the United States has the military inventory, the strategic bandwidth, and the political attention to enforce deterrence on the peninsula simultaneously with its other global commitments. On March 5th, satellite imagery provided visible, public, irrefutable evidence that North Korea has assessed that assumption and found it wanting. When North Korea finds an assumption wanting, markets price the finding. 2 wars, 1 supply chain. The math doesn't work. Now return to the open loop from Chapter 1, because the production timeline is where the Pyongyang calculus becomes most precise. North Korean strategic planners are not operating on the assumption that the United States will run out of interceptors tomorrow. They are operating on the assumption that the United States is currently in a depletion curve, a period during which its Pacific theater interceptor inventory is being drawn down faster than it is being replenished, and during which the credibility of its extended deterrence guarantee is inversely correlated with each additional Persian Gulf engagement. Every Iranian ballistic missile that forces a Patriot PAC-3 expenditure in the Middle East is a Patriot PAC-3 that cannot be restocked to a Korean Peninsula battery on any timeline shorter than 18 to 36 months. The depletion curve does not reverse when Operation Epic Fury ends. It persists through the production cycle required to rebuild inventory. And during that production cycle, during those 18 to 36 months of constrained Pacific theater interceptor availability, the cost to North Korea of escalation is at its structural minimum. This is not unprecedented behavior. It is a documented pattern. North Korean strategic provocations cluster around periods of peak American distraction with statistical consistency that eliminates coincidence as an explanation. 2006. Nuclear test. U.S. military resources saturated by Iraq and Afghanistan. 2009 nuclear test. New U.S. administration navigating 2 active conflicts. 2017. ICBM demonstration series. Maximum U.S. diplomatic distraction across multiple simultaneous crises. 2026, mobilization, active high-intensity Middle East conflict, superpower naval standoff in the Strait of Hormuz, domestic stagflationary pressure, and the most constrained Pacific theater interceptor inventory since the Patriot system's operational debut. Kim Jong-un is not a geopolitical anomaly. He is a rational actor who has identified the moment when the enforcer's cost of response is highest and the challenger's cost of provocation is lowest. That moment is now. The stakes dimension of this calculus extends beyond the Korean Peninsula itself, and this is the connection that most coverage of the North Korean mobilization has failed to make. South Korea is the world's 6th largest exporter. It produces approximately 60 to 65% of the world's DRAM memory and a substantial share of NAND flash storage, the components without which every smartphone, every server, every automotive control system, and every AI training cluster on the planet cannot be manufactured. Samsung's fabrication facilities in the Gyeonggi Province Industrial Corridor, SK Hynix's memory production complex in Icheon. These are not peripheral economic assets. They are the foundational supply chain infrastructure of the global technology economy. A Korean Peninsula contingency, even a limited exchange that does not escalate to full-scale conflict, disrupts these facilities. And here is where the two-front trap closes on the global economy with its full financial force. The Persian Gulf crisis has already imposed a severe energy supply shock on the global economy. Central banks are already trapped in the stagflation policy paralysis documented in the preceding analysis. Consumer prices are already rising faster than wage growth in every major Western economy. Now, superimpose a Korean Peninsula risk premium on the semiconductor supply chain, energy inflation, technology supply chain inflation, simultaneously. From 2 geographically separate crises with a single common cause, the American defense industrial base's inability to sustain deterrence across both theaters at the production rates that high-intensity modern conflict demands. The capital flight from South Korean and Japanese markets is not the most important financial signal emanating from the March 5 satellite imagery. The most important signal is the revision it forces in every investor's model of what the American security guarantee actually guarantees. For 80 years, the investment thesis for every Asian economy integrated into the U.S. security umbrella has incorporated an implicit assumption that American military power would deter the peninsula's most dangerous actor regardless of what else was happening in the world, regardless of how many other commitments were active, regardless of how many interceptors had been expended elsewhere. The assumption was never written into any contract, any treaty, or any formal security commitment. It was embedded in the production capacity of the American defense industrial base, which was supposed to be large enough that simultaneous depletion across multiple theaters was not a binding constraint. It is a binding constraint. The conclusion that March 5 forces on every serious strategic analyst is not complicated. It is simply the answer to a question that should have been asked loudly years ago and was instead answered only in classified budget annexes that never generated the industrial investment they required. The United States defense industrial base was not sized for the world it is now operating in. It was sized for a post-Cold War strategic environment in which the probability of simultaneous high-intensity conflict across multiple theaters was assessed as low enough that the production rates required to sustain it could be deferred in favor of precision over volume. Precision over volume is a sound strategic philosophy when adversaries are deterred from testing the limits of your inventory. It is a catastrophic strategic philosophy when three adversaries simultaneously calculate that testing those limits is rational. Iran tested it in the Persian Gulf. China tested it in the Hormuz standoff. North Korea is testing it on the Korean Peninsula. Not because they coordinated, because they all read the same production schedule. The global security architecture that 8 decades of American dominance produced is not fracturing because the United States lacks the will to defend it. It is fracturing because the industrial base that translates will into deterrence has been allowed to atrophy to the point where adversaries have found the arithmetic seams in the guarantee. Those seams are visible now. In the South Korean markets, selling off. In the Japanese yen, strengthening as capital seeks safety. In the semiconductor supply chain risk premium that is beginning to compound onto the energy inflation already reshaping the global economy. In the ICBM launchers, moving toward their positions in the dark. The illusion was not omnipotence. The illusion was that omnipotence could be maintained at production rates designed for a world that no longer exists. The production line moves at 550 units per year. The threat environment has moved faster. And the distance between those two velocities is the space in which North Korea, on the morning of March 5th, 2026, has made its move.